Well, tonight, I am going to ask that you do a little self-reflection. So get out your compact mirrors and take a look. How are you with the language you use to share the gospel? And I use this phrase with the idea that each one of us is a believer in sharing the gospel. You might think, well, I really don't share the gospel with... Hold on a second, sorry. Do I sound okay? I feel ringy, but I always do that. Well, I'm not really good at sharing the gospel, you might say, with anyone. I don't really talk about Jesus in public. When we eat out at a restaurant, we make sure to pray very quickly and quietly, just as our server has left with the drink order, so as to not give off that we are praying. Actually, we all pretend to tie our shoes at the same time, so they don't even know we're closing our eyes to avoid some conflict. Sarah makes fun of my family, actually, because she calls it my dad's praying voice, because we'll be talking at a normal level at a restaurant, and then all of a sudden when we're ready to pray, he's just, "Dear Jesus, we thank you for this food, and amen." And then that's it. And so she makes fun of that when we're at the dinner table, so that just kind of, I don't know. Maybe that describes your family, maybe it doesn't. That's okay. But anyway, we all share the gospel, whether we mean to or not. If we're going to consider ourselves a community of believers, we are all sharing a gospel, one way or another. The question is, are you spreading the gospel of Jesus' love for humanity, or a gospel of, hey sinners, look at me? If you don't, you're wrong. Look and be like me, and if you don't, then you're wrong. And I spoke a few months ago about the fruits of the Spirit, and that people will know us by the kind of fruit that we bear. And we talked also about vegetables of the Spirit. We don't want to be vegetables, we want to be fruit. But people will know us by the kind of fruit that we bear. And so therefore the words that we speak in all situations and the impact of our actions are what is going to stick in people's minds when you are out in public, whenever you are making regular conversation with people. So be aware of your fruit. And so along these lines is where I want us to focus tonight. And I want you to watch 2 video clips from this video to kind of serve as a building block for our lesson. So is anybody familiar with TED Talks? You have any idea what that is? Can I see some hands? All right. Well, TED Talks are intellectual people talking about interesting things in a down-to-earth kind of style. So I'm not up to speed on everything, and so it's nice for people to talk about these cool, interesting, new ideas that I can actually understand. And I get lost sometimes listening to them, because if you've ever been on YouTube, there's this thing called like autoplay, where when you get to the end of one video, the next one starts, and so you can sit there for hours and hours and hours of just watching the same similar kind of thing. So anyway, that kind of happens to me on TED Talks if I'm not careful. But I can start with one, and the subjects will even range from all kinds of things. So I'll start here, and by the end of it, I'm listening to something on whatever else you want to think of. So, but anyway, let's listen to these 2 clips, and I think you'll enjoy them.
So, I'll be speaking to you using language, because I can. This is one of these magical abilities that we humans have. We can transmit really complicated thoughts to one another. So what I'm doing right now is I'm making sounds with my mouth as I'm exhaling. I'm making tones and hisses and puffs, and those are creating air vibrations in the air. Those air vibrations are traveling to you, they're hitting your eardrums, and then your brain takes those vibrations from your eardrums and transforms them into thoughts. I hope. Right? I hope that's happening. So, because of this ability, we humans are able to transmit our ideas across vast reaches of space and time. Right? We're able to transmit knowledge across minds. I can put a bizarre new idea in your mind right now. I could say, imagine a jellyfish waltzing in a library while thinking about quantum mechanics. Right? Now, if everything has gone relatively well in your life so far, you probably haven't had that thought before. But now I've just made you think it through language. Right? Now, of course, there isn't just one language in the world. There are about 7,000 languages spoken around the world. And all the languages differ from one another in all kinds of ways. So some languages have different sounds, they have different vocabularies, and they also have different structures. Very importantly, different structures. That begs the question, does the language we speak shape the way we think? Now, this is an ancient question. People have been speculating about this question for forever. Charlemagne, Holy Roman Emperor, said, to have a second language is to have a second soul. Strong statement that language crafts reality. But on the other hand, Shakespeare has Juliet say, what's in a name? A rose by any other name would smell as sweet. Well, that suggests that maybe language doesn't craft reality. These arguments have gone back and forth for thousands of years. But until recently, there hasn't been any data to help us decide either way. Recently, in my lab and other labs around the world, we've started doing research, and now we have actual scientific data to weigh in on this question. So let me tell you about some of my favorite examples. I'll start with an example from an Aboriginal community in Australia that I had a chance to work with. These are the Cook Tyre people. They live in Pomporao at the very west edge of Cape York. And what's cool about Cook Tyre is in Cook Tyre, they don't use words like left and right. And instead, everything is in cardinal directions, north, south, east, and west. And when I say everything, I really mean everything. You would say something like, oh, there's an ant on your southwest leg. Or move your cup to the north-northeast a little bit. In fact, the way that you say hello in Cook Tyre is you say, which way are you going? And the answer should be north-northeast in the far distance. How about you? So imagine as you're walking around your day, every person you greet, you have to report your heading direction. That would actually get you oriented pretty fast, right? Because you literally couldn't get past hello if you didn't know which way you were going. In fact, people who speak languages like this stay oriented really, really well. They stay oriented better than we used to think humans could. We used to think that humans were worse than other creatures because some biological excuse, oh, we don't have magnets in our beaks or in our scales. No, if your language and your culture trains you to do it, actually you can do it. There are humans around the world who stay oriented really well. And just to get us in agreement about how different this is from the way we do it, I want you all to close your eyes for a second and point southeast. Now keep your eyes closed, point. Okay, so you can open your eyes. I see you guys pointing there, 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 there. I don't know which way it is myself. You have not been a lot of help. So let's just say the accuracy in this room was not very high. This is a big difference in cognitive ability across languages, right? Where one group, very distinguished group like you guys, doesn't know which way is which, but in another group, I could ask a 5-year-old and they would know. Right? There are also really big differences in how people think about time. So here I have pictures of my grandfather at different ages. And if I ask an English speaker to organize time, they might lay it out this way, from left to right. This has to do with writing direction. If you were a speaker of Hebrew, Arabic, you might do it going in the opposite direction, from right to left. How would the Cook Tyre, this Aboriginal group I just told you about, do it? They don't use words like left and right. Let me give you a hint. When we sat people facing south, they organized time from left to right. When we sat them facing north, they organized time from right to left. When we sat them facing east, time came towards the body. What's the pattern? East to west, right? So for them, time doesn't actually get locked on the body at all. It gets locked on the landscape. So for me, if I'm facing this way, then time goes this way. If I'm facing this way, then time goes this way. I'm facing this way, time goes this way. very egocentric of me to have the direction of time chase me around every time I turn my body. For the Kuuk-thaayorre, time is locked on the landscape. It's a dramatically different way of thinking about time. Here's another really smart human trick. Suppose I ask you, how many penguins are there?
While he's going to the next one, I just want us to see how we are set in our minds and our view of things. But when we get outside those cultures, how different their mindset and scope of the world truly is. So I have one more short one for us.
Languages also differ in how they describe events, right? So you take an event like this, an accident. In English, it's fine to say, he broke the vase. In a language like Spanish, you might be more likely to say, the vase broke, or the vase broke itself. If it's an accident, you wouldn't say that someone did it. In English, quite weirdly, we can even say things like, I broke my arm. Now, in lots of languages, you couldn't use that construction unless you are a lunatic and you went out looking to break your arm and you succeeded, right? If it was an accident, you would use a different construction. Now, this has consequences. So people who speak different languages will pay attention to different things depending on what their language usually requires them to do. So you show the same accident to English speakers and Spanish speakers. English speakers will remember who did it. Because English requires you to say, he did it, he broke the vase. Where Spanish speakers might be less likely to remember who did it if it's an accident, but they're more likely to remember that it was an accident. They're more likely to remember the intention. So two people watch the same event, witness the same crime, but end up remembering different things about that event. This has implications, of course, for eyewitness testimony. It also has implications for blame and punishment. So if you take English speakers and I just show you someone breaking a vase and I say, he broke the vase, as opposed to I say, the vase broke, even though you can witness it yourself, you can watch the video, you can watch the crime against the vase, you will punish someone more, you will blame someone more if I just said he broke it, as opposed to it broke. Right? The language guides our reasoning about events. Now, I've given you a few examples.
Isn't that fascinating? You don't have to. I don't think I ever would have been open to this or thought of that myself had somebody not brought it up to me. Or maybe you already knew this. Maybe you had some sort of understanding of this already. And so congrats to you. Or maybe you didn't care at all about this and you just thought it was a waste of time. So if that is your opinion, I'm sorry, that's fair though. I could go with some background music. Anyway, I think this is a very neat concept. The language that we speak influences how we think and in turn how we are going to relate to others. And so Jesus had actually a lot to say about this. Especially when he related to the Pharisees. They had molded their speech, and just to clarify, I'm not talking about simply the words that they say. Yes, we should speak in a manner that glorifies God and doesn't degrade, but what Jesus is more concerned about is how we relate to people. And so the Pharisees had cut themselves off from others by building a stand to make themselves higher than others so that they could look down on them. They looked down on people in society so that they themselves could be regarded as righteous or more upstanding than others. And so their words and laws and attitudes shaped just exactly how they saw people. And Jesus liked to break into their little world and shake things up often. So if you choose to open with me, we're going to be in Romans chapter 12 for tonight. And I've just got 3 verses for us. Romans chapter 12, starting at verse 1. Therefore, I urge you, brethren, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living and holy sacrifice, acceptable to God, which is your spiritual service of worship. And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may prove what is the will of God, what the will of God is, that which is good and acceptable and perfect. For through the grace given to me, I say to everyone among you not to think more highly of himself than he ought to think, but to think so as to have sound judgment, as God has allotted to each a measure of faith. And so in the context, that's all we're stopping there. In the context, Paul is talking to believers about the unity in the body and making room for the different gifts given by God and how we use them for worship. That's kind of the broader context. Verse 2 highlights the foundation of the believer in respect to their faith, practiced alongside other believers. And I think these verses also speak to the idea of the kind of language that we use with each other, both in the church and outside the church. Our language can be a very effective tool at weeding out those who we wish to not associate with, if that makes sense. There are many Christian terms that we like to use, and that if given the proper opportunity, we can cut down a new believer. I like the parable of the sower that Jesus tells about how people hear and kind of heed God's word. You have some who hear it, if you can remember the different aspects of it. You have some that hear it, and that get really excited about it, but they spring up very fast and then they wither away because they didn't have roots. They weren't grounded in the word. They just lived off that emotional experience. Or you have the ones that grow, but they're eventually choked out by the weeds and the thorns of life overtaking them. And so I'd like to add another one if I can. It's the crop that grows nicely, but is pulled out by the gardener because it looks slightly different than the rest. And our words can cut and divide where they were never supposed to. Now, don't get me wrong, in that we should never deviate from the things that we know are true about our following with Jesus. We should not compromise our morals or the theology that we hold as true for the sake of keeping people happy. What I'm focusing on, though, are the things that do not matter in the grand scheme of reaching people for Christ. And this is what Paul was writing about in chapter 12 here. So I asked at the beginning, if you can remember, what kind of gospel do you spread? How do you spread the gospel when you are out in the world among others? What language do you use? Have we become so inwardly focused and caught up on our regulations that we forget how to love people? My best friend is unsaved, to put it plainly. We grew up together across the street. I think the first time we met, it was snowing. I went over to his house for a snowball fight, and I pushed his face into the snow. That was our meeting. But we were friends after that. Friends for over 20 years. And yes, I feel old for being able to say that. And yes, I'm sure some of you could beat me, but let me have my moment so I can say 20 years about something. And I've thought about everything that I've been through in my Christian walk. From growing up as a kid raised in the church, and all the different things that I was involved in, and just all the church activities, and just the spiritual growth that I went through as a kid and a teenager and a young adult, and now. All those things from where I am today. Not necessarily from like a ministry standpoint in being a speaker, youth pastor, whatever, but just as a personal spiritual walk. I think about all those things that I've been through and all the path that I've been down. And then I try to translate that to my friend, who I think maybe went to church as a kid, but pretty much when he got into elementary school, I think his family probably stopped going or something like that, because I know he wasn't in the church. So I try to translate all this life that Jared has lived into my best friend's life, and when I do that, I'm putting myself separate from him. I am saying, okay, all the things that Jared went through, that is necessary for Jared's friend to go through in order for Jared's friend to get to this place right here. He has so much to go through. Learn, relearn, experience before he gets to where I am spiritually. And that's not a compliment for myself, of course. I'm not trying to boost myself up. But do you see what I mean? We are looking at others through our own lenses and with all the language that we try to use and saying, well, you have to go experience this camp in 2007 for you to be able to be spiritually where I'm at right now. And I'm putting him in this spot so far behind me that in order for him to be as good as I am, he's got a lot of work to do. And even in that time, he's moving up and I'm still moving this way. Hopefully at a pretty good rate. I would hope that I'm growing and he can't catch up. Well, that's another, never mind. I'm not going to. But do you see what I mean? I am valuing my life and my experiences above what he will have to go through, should he ever make that decision, or should he be, God use me or somebody else to break through to him. I'm valuing my experiences above that because the way that I have been shaped has led me here, and so in a way, it's how I see everybody else getting to this point, whatever this point is. What I should work on, though, is trying to love him the way that Jesus would. So rather than do all that and go through that mental shenanigan, I should work on how Jesus would love him. That does not mean necessarily forcing him to watch Christian music videos for children as an adult, as I showed you, I think, a couple times ago, the donut man singing about the fruits of the Spirit. I don't think I have to force that on people who are in their 20s. If so, if I do those things, and if I think I have to do those things, I am letting my culture and mindset get in the way of the gospel. Remember the video we watched about how different languages guide us to how we view events even. I think we sometimes get into a church mode and we shove each new convert or potential convert, we try to shove them through this mold at the risk or eventually even breaking them when they attempt to come through the other side. So what's the solution then? And I've always heard words or similar phrase, something like this: don't criticize a system or don't criticize an idea unless you have a solution to it. But rather than being set on how we have learned things and how we've experienced life in Christ and force people to do the same, we are called to share a gospel of loving each person. And again, we don't go wishy-washy on our morals. That's not what I'm saying. But where freedom is present, where there is freedom, we should be giving freedom. And I'm not going to give an action plan because then that would be me forcing my action plan and childhood Christian music videos on you, pushing you through my mold. We are called to reach the world with good news of salvation. And what I'm finding that in our own little way, we're having to find creative access ways. We use that term in missions now, creative access, ways to reach people here in our neighborhoods. Just like missionaries, we have to find different ways of reaching people. Now, God can use the obscure, and sometimes, and a lot of times, He ends up doing so. And I've heard a story of a video game streamer sharing faith with YouTubers. And if you have no idea what I just said, let me explain. So YouTube, that's what we watched actually. It's a way to watch videos. And there are people that get paid to post content on there so that they can show you videos. And some people have live interactions with people who are watching their videos at that time. So they'll record themselves doing something live, and then people will be on watching them live and have interactions with them. And I heard on one of our K-Love radio station a guy who plays video games, and he is also a Christian, and he had conversations with people watching him play video games about the gospel. And he just started having conversations with them, and he found that this was a way in which he could reach people for Christ. Does that make sense? Just a different, out of the ordinary way that maybe he wasn't even expecting. Just playing video games online, and yeah, I happen to be a Christian, but how interesting it is that God leads these conversations and these circumstances to be able to happen. And so, as kind of a closing, I was just wondering if anybody here could give some sort of testimony in a way that you have been able to be led by God to reach somebody in a very interesting and off-the-wall way, or if maybe you have been a person of being reached in an interesting and strange way. And so I'd like to hear, because I think it helps us. It helps us to see the ways in which God is reaching people that is outside of our limited view of how we think God acts. So, if anybody has something to share. Good. Thank you. Don't be afraid if you think that yours isn't interesting, because it is to somebody. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And realizing when those situations are showing themselves, I guess. Mary Alice? Hmm. Well. Hmm. Wow. Hmm. Oh, I thought you were going to say, meet my son, the 17-year-old rebellious boy. Hmm. Good. Hmm. Yeah. 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 Certainly. Thank you. Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Thank you.
My experience at VBS this week, again, I don't have a whole lot of interaction with children outside of our immediate family. Being a teacher of 8 and 9-year-olds this week, gives me an opportunity to meet some new kids and establish some relationships.
Yeah.
Hopefully make some positive influences in their life this week.
Yeah. Good. So, kind of concluding, I want us to just see how God can work in our lives outside of our realm of narrow-mindedness and closedness. Kind of like the idea with the language. If we grow up speaking, most of us probably in here grew up speaking English. So we have certain things that we don't really know about. Like, until I saw this video, I didn't even think about the idea of like how we view time, or how that's different than other cultures that view time, or how we talk about some languages don't even have words for numbers. So therefore, of course, they don't really have math systems. That's not to say that they're less intelligent, but it's just you are in a pattern of what your language provides for you. And so learning these other languages almost like opens you to seeing how people view things. And it is through those ways that we can find different avenues of reaching them. And so I thank you for you guys sharing tonight, so we can see those different avenues with which we can reach people. Maybe that's not how God's going to use you, but just to see how God can work and what he is doing in the world. So, if you'll stand with me, I'm going to close this out, but I want you guys to ask God to direct you to someone, maybe this week, maybe this month, you have the ability to reach. So ask God to direct you to somebody you have the ability to reach. Just don't be surprised if it's in a way that you haven't before. So thank you. Pray with me. Dear God, I ask that you would be working in our lives as you are, but just to free us of the conventional methods and ideas that we have, not just for the sake of throwing out the old, but for the idea of reaching others and not being complacent. God, I pray that you would be with us in our conversations, in our example that we are showing the world, in whatever we are doing, the type of language that we use, not bad or good, but just what kind of language and words we are using. That you would guide and direct our speech so that we can reach others ultimately for the sake of Christ. I pray that you would be with us, help us to spread your love, and we thank you for all these things. Amen.